Founder of Catch Wrestling Alliance, where we keep real wrestling alive. So today we're going to be talking about freestyle and the event that just happened this past weekend, where I think the main highlight or the main shocker was Kyle Dake beating and basically eliminating Jordan Burroughs from being able to compete or being able to represent the United States at the Olympics. And so that was one big shocker that happened. Um, but say if you were to only look at those matches, then what you would probably see is like a point wrestling contest. Um, so where it's like, so like even in the first match, Kyle ended up like getting a point just by pushing Burrows out of bounds. So that's like a point. It wasn't necessarily like a pin, but don't like expect something like that, like an all-out domination from one person, especially at the high level there, like, or at the highest level. You're just really not going to see that happening. But with that being said, you did see Kyle Dake dominate somebody, right? And let's go ahead and talk about it. I think that's actually something that's pretty interesting. And we actually I got some video for you. It was Dake against Nolf. So this is someone that has actually made headlines doing like some pretty amazing wrestling. So we've even done videos about him too. So great wrestler, but freestyle is different from folk style, and Dake just showed that. And so let's go ahead.
At 79 kilograms, but that's not a non-Olympic weight class. So coming down here to 74 kg, got a pass to the semifinals and showcasing himself right away. Big move out of the gate and trying to finish it here early.
Kyle Dake just owning owning Nolf in that situation. And what was really cool about that, and actually we have a breakdown video that's going to be coming out based off that initial technique, because it was a type of low single, but it wasn't like your traditionally executed low single, like the way the person who made low singles really popular, John Smith. It wasn't exactly the way that he did it, which is really cool. So Dake ended up actually kind of attacking with the head on the outside of the knee. And that's really what made it different. That's really what kind of set it up. So, but say like the video that we're going to do, or we're going to put out, we're going to kind of talk about the technique that he did, but then we'll kind of mention kind of in the catch wrestling way, you don't necessarily pick them up again. So that's kind of what happened, where it's like you have Nolf kind of getting that underhook, and instead of trying to limp arm out, which is a technique you'll see in freestyle and folk style, they kind of keeps like the body lock there, and then they end up going back to standing, and then that's when Dake gets that really like amazing, spectacular throw, right? So that's what happened, but let's kind of talk about like situations that aren't necessarily that, where it's like someone just goes in and owns the other person, and kind of gets somewhat of a pin. In freestyle, you are seeing where it's like usually they have short rounds, points, point system where you can kind of game it, where it's like you get a bunch of takedowns, and then or you roll the person over like 3 or 4 times and you've won. So folk style definitely has a lot of great aspects of wrestling, and it came from catch wrestling, but now it is truly far from its original source, and that's something that I kind of wanted to touch on. So if you're like in an area where the only thing around you is folk style, like if you're not in the United States or whatever, I'd say still go for it. It can still teach you a lot of things, but just know that there are a lot of aspects to it that wouldn't necessarily help you out as much in a catch wrestling match or even like an MMA situation. Like a lot of the parterre stuff is to kind of allow you to stall until the referee can stand you back up. But in catch wrestling, since the idea is that it's really closer to a real fight or whatever, so you would still have to, if you get thrown down, you still have to fight to get back out, or you want to try to reverse someone, so where you end up on top and you still stay on the ground. You still stay, on hands and knees, or you're basically not standing. So there's a lot of reversals in catch wrestling that do that. So um, that's kind of a point that I'd like to make, because you definitely don't see that as much in freestyle. You'll see a lot of people waiting. They'll flatten themselves out or into that, like the parterre position, and then wait for the ref to stand them back up. So I'd want to emphasize that more, because ultimately that's kind of how Jordan Burroughs lost later, where Dake was able to do a leg lace, and then he ended up kind of picking Burroughs' legs up, even though Burroughs was trying to resist getting rolled over. But that's why you get scenarios like that, even though they do, like, those are the pictures that kind of circulated in the internet. Um, and that is freestyle wrestling, but I wouldn't want people to think of that as what like how we say keep real wrestling alive. Um, that's why I have to say keep real wrestling alive, because you see there's that difference where, so like in a catch wrestling match, that type of resistance or even a leg lace wouldn't happen as often, because you're not getting people just pancaking out trying to resist from getting rolled over, because in catch wrestling there's no points, and if you get rolled over, who cares, right? So that parterre position isn't necessarily a very beneficial position to go to or to stay in, because the referee is not going to stand you back up. And I think that's the main point that I want to try to make, where it's like catch wrestling is still different, even though this is kind of like the origin of folk style. But I really hope to kind of wake people up, or at least wake up wrestling fans to know that there is the original version. Like, you didn't have the referees always starting everything over or resetting everything. And for me, that's what's more exciting. And I hope that that can be exciting, or at least that people can learn to develop a taste for something different like that. Right, because like I know that the whole idea of like stalling and this and that is well entrenched in especially the folk style mentality. You'll have, like, in front of the University of Iowa, you have that big statue of Dan Gable, and he is standing with his arm up, right, which is representative of the penalty position, or at least like the ref will have their fist up when they're calling a stalling foul. And so, Dan Gable got famous for kind of calling stalling fouls, not only his wrestlers, but during the matches, he would be pointing out the stalling that would be going on in wrestling. But the thing is, like, another main point that I want to make sure people know is that, like, in catch wrestling, traditionally there was no time limits, so you actually had the time to use fatiguing your opponent as a strategy. So when you get them down, you would jump on them. You would, what we call, riding them. You would ride them, right? And you basically punish them for being underneath. You're not trying to finish them, really. You're trying to wear them out. You're trying to make them tired. Or even Farmer Burns kind of made the analogy of making them work out. Right? You push their head down, and they're gonna raise it back up. You push it down again, and so how many reps can they do of that? Right? So that's kind of one of the things he mentioned, or like this is the analogy he used, where it's like they're lifting weights. But it's your body weight. So allow them to do as many reps as you can to fatigue those muscles so that they can't fight back. And that was very characteristic of catch wrestling. So I hope people can kind of see where it's like in catch wrestling, you might not even think about finishing the person right away. A lot of times you're going to be thinking about breaking them down, taking away their strength, doing all those kinds of things. instead of just trying to blast through and get some kind of pin or submission. It's cool and all, but sometimes it's not the best strategy, especially if you're a high-level grappler and you're going up against another high-level grappler. Chances are you're not going to be able to blast through them as easily as Dake just blasted through Nolf, even though Nolf is also another high-level wrestler. But he's more known for folk style than freestyle. But so those are kind of anomalies, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to show you. Where it's like, wow, it shows like Dake is, you can say he's like on another level, or I don't know, or Nolf just blanked out for a second. Who knows what happened in that match? But it was pretty amazing. The strategy just worked perfectly for Dake. And so that's why I showed it to you. And yeah, we're definitely going to do a breakdown on that. The low single, but with your head on the outside, and he actually used his head to kind of push the knee of Nolf over to kind of get him down, or at least get him to bend his knee and almost get that takedown, which led to that big spectacular throw, and getting all those points. Basically, that first move ended the match pretty much right then and there. That would have been some kind of like a Herculean task to get points to beat Dake if you were Nulf in that situation. It'd be really tough to come back from that. It'd be one of these kind of tasks that only Jordan Burroughs could accomplish or whatever. But we saw later that he couldn't even accomplish his goal this time around. So we'll see what happens in the future for Jordan Burroughs. But I wanted to show that highlight there. Pretty cool. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, go ahead and start asking, because I've said the main things that I wanted to say. I would just like want people to realize that these things that are called wrestling, or these traditions of wrestling, are not that old. They're not even or maybe they're 100 years old now, right? So, and folk style probably even less. Or around 100 years, right? So when people are like, oh, this is wrestling, when they're talking about these other styles, it's like, hey, it's not as old as catch wrestling. So these are other things I want people to think about, where it's like a lot of these traditions that people have, if you look into it, they are actually very recent. Like the whole thing even about the singlet, that really didn't exist up until more recently. Like if you look at these old catch wrestling pictures, they were wearing tights, whether it be shorts or leggings. So it looks like they're doing it in yoga pants, right? So they inspired yoga back then, right? Or they were inspired by yoga. Who knows, right? So nowadays you see or at least a lot of women wearing what looks like what the catch wrestlers wore back in the early 1900s and in the late 1800s and stuff. But yeah, that was what you wore to compete, right? So you would see the tight leggings, but unfortunately at that time, I believe that most of them were made out of wool, so I'm sure they were probably itchy. And then you'd wear your wrestling shoes, and that's what you competed in. And singlet came later, but you might hear people nowadays talking about like, oh, that's the tradition, that's what we wore, or whatever. But that it doesn't necessarily seem to be the case in the United States in particular. So yeah, just like be aware of what you think is traditional. It could actually be a new tradition or newish, or what I mean newish. A lot of times, if it's less than 100 years old, it's relatively new. Real traditions are some of these that can go back hundreds, if not thousands of years in different cultures and stuff like that. So same thing even with judo. People think like, oh, it's so old, but it's really a relatively recent development. Yeah, but grappling itself is of old development, right? People were wrestling ever since the dawn of time, right? So even in the early books of the Bible, there was wrestling, like against the angel, right? But then also in the earliest text that we know of, right, the Epic of Gilgamesh, there was wrestling right at the beginning. A big wrestling contest between Gilgamesh and his he became really good friends later with him, Enkidu. That was some of the earliest writings that we know of, and wrestling was a part of it. And then even like the whole thing about like a different I think it was like paintings in a tomb or in a cave in Egypt that depict all these kinds of wrestling moves and stuff like that. So wrestling as something like you can think of as a tradition or as something that humans have done is definitely a tradition that goes back thousands of years. A lot of our modern understanding of wrestling or grappling traditions are not very old, right? Um, so kind of be flexible in your mind, um, especially especially when I'm trying to convince you of something. Just agree with me, right? Um, no, just kidding. No, but I think that's kind of my point where it's like since you have these kind of newer styles, these newer wrestling styles like folk style and freestyle, you get people who like get converted into that kind of I don't want to say cult, but I mean just to kind of give an analogy where it's like you get people who think that this is what wrestling is, and then also too like what they did in the Olympics with French wrestling, they changed the name to Greco-Roman to kind of make people believe that this is what the Greeks and the Romans did, right? So then you'll have people defending something like the mismanagement of the wrestling, right? And where how they did get kicked out of the Olympics, right? But then there had to be a mass mobilization where people protested to get wrestling back into the Olympics recently. Um, but these are the things where it's like you can think of um, uh, like like these things that people are calling wrestling nowadays. There was an older tradition that might be more interesting to you. So I would say it'd be great if we could replace Greco with actual catch wrestling. Um, but maybe it will get replaced with uh, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu since they just got some. I think they got provisionally entered into the Olympics. Um, yeah, so just keep an open mind because I think a lot of people don't like they even try to put their ideas of freestyle and folk style onto what they think catch wrestling is or was, and a lot of times that's just wrong. It's problematic, right? Um, yeah, so keep that open mind. Catch wrestling is actually something that's really exciting, and I think if you look at a lot of the matches that we have on this YouTube channel, you'll really like them, or at least a lot of people really like them, and they've even messaged me talking about like this definitely looks more like real wrestling, or at least looks like wrestling compared to even other people who put out some videos of matches where they're calling it catch wrestling, but people have messaged me saying that those look like jujitsu and not wrestling, right? So feel free to check out all the events and stuff that we've had. Um, and now in Los Angeles, to give you guys an update, a lot of people are getting vaccinated against COVID, and actually the COVID numbers are dramatically decreasing. So a lot of places that were under like strict quarantine now, like gyms are open. They still have some restrictions on the amount of people who can be like at gyms and restaurants and stuff like that, but they're allowed to reopen. People are allowed to eat inside again and stuff like that. So with that being said, we should have more events coming up so we can continue keeping real wrestling alive. We'll continue showing people what real catch wrestling is. So hopefully you guys stay tuned and support us so you can become a member of this channel. You can also, if you want to learn the real thing, you can go over to our website, become a student as well. Up to you. We just enjoy keeping real wrestling alive here. So it's good. We got a comment here from Shinhee E. Uh, is this the live stream or is this live? Yes, it is live. It is live. So feel free to ask some questions. I'll be here for a little bit longer. I definitely just wanted to jump on and talk about that match. Actually, I was really impressed by that match, Kyle Dake and Nolf, because it showed some pretty cool technique, and in this case, it was smooth wrestling where it didn't, well, until it did get stopped by the ref. It wasn't stopped by the ref, so it started off really cool with that low single, and then it went to the throw, and then Dake was trying to go for that pin there. So that whole sequence was without interruption. He was getting points and stuff like that, so that's like the nature of freestyle. But overall, it was really great wrestling, and so there's a lot of great wrestling you can learn from freestyle and folk style. But just know again, it's not pure catch wrestling, but it's still really cool. I really enjoyed seeing that because I watched the later matches with Dake and Burrows, and those are great and all that. But like to see another great wrestler like Nolf just get destroyed so quickly, um, um, that was really impressive. Okay, so Shinhee has another statement. Let's see. Cool. Hello from the far south, New Zealand. Yeah, yeah. I heard you guys are doing a great job, and seems like you guys are pretty free to move around, or you have like limited um, quarantines that are limited shutdowns and stuff. So hopefully, if United States can get their act together, then maybe I can go down and visit you guys. I'd love to go see it. I've been to Australia and I thought it was beautiful, and everyone says that New Zealand is even more beautiful than Australia. So hopefully that didn't offend any Australians. But I want to go to both places. So, so um, yeah, hopefully travel can start opening up again, or at least travel between our country, United States, and other countries, because I know we've been banned from so many countries that I usually go to. So I'm really excited to get back to going out and meeting everybody. So yeah, hopefully sooner than later. Okay, so hopefully everyone can act right and do what you can. It's easy as wearing a mask and stuff to help prevent the spread, and that helps prevent shutdowns and all that. Yeah, I actually was able to teach a class yesterday because the restrictions have been lifted, or they've been lightened in Los Angeles. So I was able to get back to teaching. So that was pretty nice. That was actually really nice. So I'm pretty sure we'll add more and more classes. But just as long as LA can continue with our trend of dramatically falling cases of COVID. So, all right. So Shinhee, how I understand is that freestyle wrestling isn't catch wrestling because freestyle wrestling doesn't have submissions. Am I right? Well, yes, that's like a major and kind of like something that's obvious or easy to see that they don't have submission holds, but also too the whole thing about the time limits where they have very short matches, right? And that is a major distinction between catch wrestling and these other styles like freestyle and folk style. Um, Catch wrestling didn't have time limits. In our events, we usually use a 20-minute limit. So at least with 20 minutes, you'll have the ability to use like fatigue or fatiguing your opponent as a strategy. And that was like a traditional strategy used by a lot of catch wrestlers back in the day, because a lot of times, like especially if you're evenly matched, you're not going to be able to just like go in and just muscle somebody and just like destroy them right away. You're going to have to try to battle them and fatigue them to make it easier for you to, roll someone over who's really good. So usually you're not going to be able to do it just like how Kyle Dake just did in that video that I showed earlier. It usually doesn't happen that way. And you'll see like in the match with Kyle Dake and Burrows after that in that tournament, Kyle Dake just couldn't go in and destroy Burroughs like that. This Burroughs is a very high level wrestler. Yeah, so those are some of the characteristic differences between these amateur styles and catch wrestling. But granted, I mean, like a lot of these amateur wrestlers, like Dake and Burroughs, even Nolf and all that, they they are great wrestlers in their own right, and I'm sure that they can pin a lot of people. They can put a lot of people on their backs. But like, I just want to make that clear where it's like what they're doing is still not catch wrestling, and I really want to promote the real thing, right? The real catch wrestling. So hopefully, and like not hopefully, I mean, people like it. So we're just gonna continue having events very soon. All right, another statement from Shinhee. I really hope catch comes to New Zealand and to introduce catch wrestling to this country, or you'd like me to introduce catch wrestling to this country, overrun by jujitsu and no other options. It's like a monopoly. I really believe we need more options other than jujitsu. I agree. um, so yeah. Hopefully, let's keep track of the travel restrictions. If you hear anything, just message me, and I'll try to keep an eye out. I try to keep an eye out, and like I'll see the news and stuff. Even for going back to Singapore and stuff like that, the government is considering like lightening the travel restrictions for people who are vaccinated. But right now, I believe it's still pretty strict. I believe I can't go to Singapore, even where in the past I could just go even without trying to get a visa or anything like that. I was able to just walk in. It was that easy, or is that nice with regards to the arrangement that we've had between our governments. So hopefully it gets back to that soon, very sooner than later, because I'm itching to go somewhere. Okay, Shinhi, I wonder who you see as really good catch wrestling. Right. Yeah, well, hopefully you guys can see in our upcoming events. But like even one of the up and comers who did very well in our events, his name's Anthony Pachek. He, in this time, since quarantine and all that, he's been training a lot with my good friend on the East Coast, John Strickland, and he's been doing a lot of no-gi jiu-jitsu. So he was in a tournament in Iowa, I believe. So he's trying to keep active and he's trying to improve. So I think you'll probably see a lot of great things from him. Possibly even Matt Tran, who's also one of the better catch wrestlers who competed in our events. He won at the first Frank Gotch tournament that we had in Iowa. So he was one of the other people that he's actually competed a bunch in Catch Wrestling Alliance events, but he doesn't quite get the fame, right, as others have gotten. So there are a bunch of really good people who are practicing, and we basically just got to show them to the world. So we got to have events again. So we got to start that up sooner than later. So hopefully we can be doing that sooner than later. All right. So keep on asking your questions, and I'll be here for a few more minutes. I think I've made my points right in regards to even like the differences in the styles, and also um, these other styles can still be exciting and still be interesting. But yeah, like these other styles don't have the submission holds, or they have really short time limits or point systems and stuff like that. So that is what makes them not catch wrestling. And hopefully you guys can find it in your hearts to like all these different styles. So if you like freestyle and folk style, hopefully you can still like catch wrestling as well. It should be even more exciting, but if you have like these matches that go on for longer, I mean, a lot of times there's like a lot of drama in that. Because I had a match in England that went the full 20 minutes. But what I heard from people afterwards is that they were like the drama of it was really exciting to them. So that is what really like what people might not know, especially if you're watching it live, you can really get caught up in the drama of the match, like the back and forth between the two competitors, where it's like one person might get an advantage or they might get on top, and then the person reverses it, and then they're on top. So it's like you got this back and forth going on, and that's really exciting, especially if you're watching it live or if you're present there. Really, really cool, right? Um, yeah. So um, that's uh, that's kind of another thing about catch wrestling, and also if you're able to watch it live, it's even more exciting. You get more of that whole idea about like the like kind of like live, or at least in England that's kind of what they called it, where it's like, oh, I was living that match, right? Where you see this back and forth going on, and you can just ride that wave of emotion, or it can be really, really exciting and really fun. Shinhi, one thing I have difficulty getting in my head, or give let me see. One thing I have difficulty getting my head around is that old catch wrestling rules. Choking is banned, but neck crank is legal, right? Yeah. So that comes from the pins. So turning someone's head, so that they have to roll onto their back, demonstrates more control than a choke. Chokes were considered like a beginner's move. So, like high level grapplers, and in professional matches, it really wasn't done. It was considered like not part of the code of catch wrestling because it doesn't demonstrate control, and someone can be lucky and get a choke. So that's one of the reasons why. And actually, it's been banned for the longest time, like since the mid 1800s. So um, that is why that is like that, right? And so this is one of the rules that people want to preserve, especially some of these old timers, because if you didn't have it, then you actually do have people just converting to catch wrestling, and I mean, converting what they call catch wrestling into jujitsu, and that's also been kind of pointed out a lot by people. Like they're like, oh yeah, these other people, their matches look like jujitsu. It's almost virtually indistinguishable when they allow chokes. Yeah, but I think that also shows where it's like, yeah, like nowadays the modern tradition of grappling has heavily been influenced by jujitsu. So um, that is why people, or say like you, might have difficulty wrapping your head around that notion about no chokes. It's just because it's so common nowadays. Um, but that it is what it is. Let me see. Marcus saying something about kind of like the downward elbow rule. Um, yes, you know how like chokes and stuff, but yeah, like chokes again, yeah, it just wasn't seen as like the way to win. People didn't necessarily like seeing it. Also, the wrestlers themselves show, or like even Earl Caddock, catch wrestling champion, was just like, that's how you tell if someone's green or like a low level grappler. They're trying to choke everybody. But once you know, and like even say so Caddock kind of echoed what Farmer Burns was saying, where he's just like, yeah, you can choke if you want, or like, but the wrestling, like when he was talking about jujitsu, he said like, my wrestling is like kept people far away from being able to even choke me. So it's like I never even had that problem. um, but say like nowadays, because people are really their mentality is really influenced by jujitsu, then they think that's like a really like great end all be all choke, but even a few weeks ago, probably a few months ago, right, there's like that Gary Tonin match where he was trying to choke. It was like a MMA match where he was trying to choke some low level grappler, and the guy just had a little bit choke defense, and then it never materialized for him. He was able to get out every time and almost beat Tonin by strikes. Right. So Elena Castillo, have you and John Strickland discussed having a tournament in South Carolina? Sure. Yeah, we have definitely. Is that where you live, Elena? Because yeah, if we yeah, we basically just yeah, we've talked about it. So yeah, we can see about venues, and I do know people in North and South Carolina, so it's um, possible to do something out there. It's just at least for me, it's really easy to kind of get something set up either here in Los Angeles or in Las Vegas. So if it's also possible for you to come out to either one of those locations, yeah, that'd be easy for me. Okay. In jiu-jitsu, oh, so Shinhi, in jiu-jitsu, neck cranks is known to be a nasty move. So when I do it in my rolling session, I get told off, right? So not to use it, sadly. Yeah, that's the thing. So it's like you have people where, people have some big resistance or like they get this cognitive dissonance where they're like, oh, why don't you use chokes? But then if you say, oh, we're doing neck cranks, which a lot of times you can get a submission faster than choking somebody, then they're like, what? I can't wrap my head around that, or just don't do that, or whatever. So just think about that, where it's like how we talked about earlier, where it's like kind of like this. Sometimes traditions aren't even that old, right? So something you kind of hold on to, it might not even be like that old, or like kind of just you can just go with the flow in certain things, right? Right, and let me see. We have a bunch of you guys are asking questions. So let me try to. So Jackson Prince, what are the main differences between catch wrestling and jiu-jitsu? Wrestling, right? The whole idea of not being on your back, that is like the main differences. And so catch wrestling has a lot of ways of getting off your back and kind of getting either reversing the person, so where you end up on top of them and you're on the ground, or you can even stand back up. That's one of the main differences. Um, Let me see. Uh, yeah, so Shinhei is like catch wrestling. You can also win by pin, but in jiu-jitsu they don't have pins, right? But the thing is, so like talking about pins is like, you if you come from a jiu-jitsu background, you can't necessarily disregard pins because, like, say even was a few weeks ago, I think we did another show where I had a talk about it, where this big jiu-jitsu guru John Danaher, like, he even talked about the value of pins and, like, holding someone in place or pinning someone being super important, and that can really help you to set up your submissions, right? So if you're able to control someone, then it makes it easier for you to submit them, right? So if you're in a submission only tournament, then if you can control them, right, so pin them, right, then you have a higher chance of being able to dictate when the match ends, where the match occurs, and how it ends, right? Because if you're controlling them, you can kind of let them move a certain way, like free one of their arms, so they think they're going to get out, but then you've already you've set your trap, and then you're able to submit them right after. Once you let them get that freedom, and then you're able to set up that trap where you can submit them after. Yeah. All right. So actually, I have to go. Um, so I think we'll have to call it a day right now. So something has come up, and I gotta take off. But thank you for asking all your questions. You can still message. You can either you can comment in the chat. You can also message on our Facebook page or our Instagram page or on Twitter. So if you have any further questions, you can do that, or you can wait for our next live stream, which will be next week. So yeah, but thank you for watching. Thank you for asking questions, and we'll see you next time. Keep real wrestling alive.